Hi, this is Porter. In the second installment of Words of Comfort. They are certainly words. I don't know if they'll bring anybody any comfort. Like I say, probably nobody will ever even listen to this. But if push comes to shove at anything, hey, this is the best, closest I come to journaling. So I'm doing that at least. I'm doing it. That's good. There's just, there's a list of things I could talk about today. I don't know what it is people need to hear or anything like that, but it's more of what I could talk about. I could talk about Come Follow Me. I love Come Follow Me and how awesome that's been, the changes in the youth program. I could talk about deeper learning, all of those things I feel very strongly, and I'll probably talk at some point about it. But I guess if I were to talk about anything right now, the thing I'd feel most impressed to talk about is Skunks and Fleas. I know, that's kind of a weird way to start out a gospel discussion, but I'm just reminded of this story, and I think it was like late 90s, maybe early 2000, where in the northeastern states, they had this rash of problems where the skunk population was just decimated. I mean, they were just finding dead skunks everywhere. And it was a problem. They didn't know if it was a disease. They didn't know what was going on here with all these dead skunks that were just showing up all over the place. Come to find out, as time went on, they did research, which is what researchers do, and they come to find out that the winter before was just a really light winter and didn't kill all the bugs like it was supposed to do. And then the summer breaks out, and there's just this infestation of fleas. And skunks, who are normally very fastidious, very clean, they groom themselves very well, actually. People don't think about that because, they do have that smelly thing that they do, but they're actually very clean animals, just got overwhelmed. And they weren't getting rid of the fleas or grooming themselves. They weren't doing it as well as they should, and they were just getting overran by fleas. And the fleas were literally sucking the life out of them, just sucking the lifeblood out of these poor skunks. And then, of course, that led to anemia. That led to them being more tired and fatigued, having less energy, less drive, and less will to clean themselves like they should be. They knew the answer probably. I got to get rid of these fleas. I just don't feel like it. I'm so tired. And they just got overwhelmed until they were literally, the life was sucked out of these skunks. They couldn't do anything. They died. And that is the story of dead skunks. Now, how does that apply to us? I think, if you follow my awesome analogy I have going here, I think a lot of times we can be like skunks. I think a lot of times we're skunks. And sometimes we can do really good at getting the fleas off of us. Sometimes we probably should do a little bit better. So what are the fleas? What are those things that literally suck the life, suck the joy out of us in our lives? I can think of a couple right off the top of my head. What if I'm a gossiper or a backbiter? What if I'm going around doing that? That's probably going to be really problematic for me as far as having fellowshipping, having relationships, right? If I'm in a ward, I'm gossiping and backbiting all the time and promoting the atmosphere, that ward is going to have a lot more contention, a lot more issues. I could get in really good with that person I'm gossiping and backbiting about, but then that person's going to go gossip and backbite too, and I'm not going to feel good about that. I'm always going to be paranoid about it. It's just going to lead to poor fellowshipping. So you have the flea, and then you have the anemia, or the consequence of that life-sucking flea on you. See what we're doing? Another example, I could be very accepting of worldviews. I could be internalizing them and taking them as my own. That is going to lead to a problem. The consequence of that particular flea is going to be having doctrinal problems at some point. You're going to have that problem. Another flea could be, which is something that we're going to talk a lot about here today, is frustration with priesthood leaders. That is a thing. That is going to equal an inability to follow. That is going to lead to maybe having others have an inability to follow. I could be I'm not breaking the big commandments. I'm not killing anybody. I'm not adulterating anybody. But perhaps I'm just breaking the small commandments. Maybe I'm not obeying the Sabbath like I should. Maybe I'm not, being as honest as I should. Maybe I'm having some coffee or maybe a drink here and then. Whatever those small commandments is, that is going to equal the anemia that comes from that flea is going to be a lack of the presence of the Holy Ghost, that comforter, that guide, that spirit for us. We are going to have that less in our life because of our small commandment breaking. That's a thing. Maybe I'm being prideful. That is going to equal less compassion. Maybe I'm being angry. That is going to lead to less forgiving, being both forgiving of others and receiving forgiveness. Let me tell you, I'm just a firm believer in inactivity never just happens overnight, right? We see it that way because, hey, yesterday so-and-so was here at church on Sunday, and now they're not coming anymore. Well, something must have happened. Somebody must have said something that day that offended them. Yeah, they said that this offended them, or they said that this doctrine is something they don't appreciate, or they always pin it to one point. And I'm trying to be as gracious and compassionate as I can because I'm sure there's lots of situations, everybody's different, but really, they're not. They're not. Listen, I don't know every situation out there, but I know the human animal pretty well to know how this works. Inactivity is always, loss of testimony is always an aggregate. It's never just one thing. It's always a bunch of fleas on you that suck the joy and life of the gospel out of you to when something happens that before would not have even been a blip on our radar. Now it's a faith crisis. And we always are so comfortable in pointing to that one scapegoat. Well, that's why. No, it never, ever is. That person, including myself, at times in my life, has been struggling for quite some time with some stuff. And then that happened. And they didn't have the energy to get the fleas off like they should. And listen, you can be angry at me for saying that. I care less. It is what it is, and it's just the truth of it. So I think it would behoove us to just simply get better at grooming ourselves, right? Getting rid of these fleas, i.e. repenting, right? Recognizing, hey, I got to get rid of these things in my life that are sucking the joy of the gospel out of my life. What are those things? Is it gossiping? Is it backbiting? Am I talking trash about somebody? Am I breaking this little command? What is it? How do I fix that? How do I get rid of that so that I can have more joy in the gospel? That's really what this comes down to. How do I groom myself? How do I get rid of those fleas? How do I repent? I got to get rid of the fleas. Or, and here's an idea, something that I'd like to dwell on this much, because the idea is we're not in this alone. No matter where you are, you have a group of people around you who are going through the same human experiences, love the gospel just as much as you do, and it's called a ward or a branch. And it's like, there's the skunk that could do a better job of grooming themselves, but there's a better animal out there to think of, and that's monkeys, right? Every monkey video you ever see, where there's a group of monkeys sitting together, what are they doing? You go to the zoo and you see a group of monkeys in a pen together. What are they doing? They're not playing cards. They're not gossiping or backbiting. They're grooming each other, right? They're doing the work of going through, finding those little bugs and getting those little bugs are. Whatever those little bugs are, they're helping each other. They're helping each other repent or getting rid of the fleas. We can be those monkeys, I guess, is what I'm basically trying to say in my bad analogy. We can do that. We can help each other. We can lead each other to repenting. And really, I think this is the point of a ward or a branch. A group of people helping each other through example, through saying something when needed, and helping each other repent. Now, how do we do that, right? This gets tricky. It's definitely an art, not a science. I have found that if I ever want to know 10, 15 things that I'm doing wrong, all I ever have to do is go tell one person one thing that they're doing wrong. Because then I will immediately learn the 10 or 15 things that I'm doing wrong, right? That's how that always goes, right? So maybe approaching it in a critical way. Hey, you're screwing that up. You're doing that wrong. Maybe not be the best approach, right? I remember at one point in my life, I was called to be a primary teacher, and I was being called to be a primary teacher because it was a group of boys. They're pre-deacon age. They had lots of energy. They were running through some teachers. There's some primary teachers, they were hard to keep up with. They were kind of knotheads. They're good kids. They're just kind of knotheads. And they've grown up to be great young men. But at this stage of their life, they were something. They were what they were. What every young man is at that age, pre-deacon age. It's a fun time. And because it was just 4 or 5 boys, there's no girls, they said, you know what, we need a male influence to come on in there and help these boys. That's how I get Who Scout into this thing, because I'm going to go in there and fix it, because that's how that's going to work. And so I go on in there, and, there's a good group. We had a lot of fun, and, I don't know, played a lot of maybe hangman. I don't know if we taught the gospel that much. But one thing I always try to teach these young boys is, hey, guys, come here. Listen up. Because of who you are, because of the families you come from, because of the ways you've been blessed, you are going to be leaders. That's not a question, right? There's no question mark there. It is a mathematical equation. A plus B in your life equals C. People are going to follow you because who you are. The only question at that point becomes, are you leading in a good direction or a bad direction? Are you a good leader or a bad leader? Because those are the 2 principles of good leadership, right? First off, you have to be going in a good direction. That's what we're talking about, right? You could have all the people in the world following you. If you're leading them off a cliff, you are not a good leader, right? You're missing the mark. The second principle there is you could be absolutely going in the right direction. You can have the answers needed, but if you turn around and you're all on your own, there's nobody following you, okay, let's take a look at what we're doing. You're not being a good leader, right? Let's rethink how we're doing this. You have to be a good leader. And that's really what we want. We need to be around people leading each other. That's how this church is built off of, is people leading people, right? We don't have a preacher get up and preach to us every Sunday. We get up and teach each other. Every class, we're teaching each other. Every time we're in we're helping each other. We're leading. That is the point of every contact we're in. And of course, it's always easier. It's always much natural to lead in a bad direction, right? It's always easy to, because it comes easy. It's a natural thing. And recently I've seen, and in all honesty, been in many times, if not always, a poor leader. And I'll tell you, many times I'm tempted to value a friendship so much that it's so important. I want to keep people on good terms that I'm not going to tell them the truth, right? I'm going to see something that they're doing, and I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to invalidate the friendship. And that's a real thing. That can happen. I'm just not being a good leader. And like I said, this is an art form, not a science. I could be in a situation where, because it's very natural, I could agree with or join in whatever their culture of destruction is, right? They could be trash talking somebody. They could be talking politics. They could be talking this, that, or the other thing. And I rise to that or sink to that very easily. I find myself not leading in a good direction, but just jumping right on into that barn fire. Whatever the case may be. There's lots of times where I see something and I just ignore it. Hey, it's none of my business. I just ignore it. And then there's times where I'm tempted to, when I see something, I allow my sympathy for the situation or for that person to excuse what I'm seeing, right? I know this person's struggling. I know this person's having a hard time. Yeah, I just saw them do that to their kid, but I know they're going through a hard time. Or I just saw them say that thing to their wife, but I know I'm going through a hard time. Or they're going through a hard time, so, I'm going to let it slide. Listen, the world is full. It is full of friends who will say nice things to their drowning friends, right? There's all these friends in the world who will pat you on the back and say, oh, you look great as you're sinking in quicksand. Your hair looks nice as you're sinking in quicksand. Now, that might be nice to hear. We like hearing those things. We like people, patting us on the back and making us feel good. It's just not what we need. It's not what we need. in my time of counseling people, people will come in and they'll share what's going on in their life, and I'll listen to them, and I'll do my best to put my listening ears on and not jump in with solutions, right? And I'll listen to them. And then I always, my normal go-to move is I sit down with them and I say, okay, we have two options. And it's up to you what you want to do. I can pat you on the back and tell you everything's going to be okay, because guess what? It is. It's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. I can do that. I can pat you on the back and tell you everything's going to be okay. Or the second option is I can tell you something that you might not want to hear, but will actually make a difference. What are you looking for here out of this conversation? And it's always a funny response that I get back, because you see it in their facial expressions. Sometimes they openly admit it. That, what they want is for me to pat them on the back and tell them, which is fine. I can do that, and that's not a bad thing. It's just not a good leader thing to do. It's a great comforting thing to do, and sometimes it's appropriate to do that. But what they need, they can get that from anywhere. Why they've come in to talk to their branch president or bishop for it is to be led in a good direction. So we need to do that, right? We need to lead in a good direction. We need to help people get rid of their fleas. So look, how do we lead effectively? This can really be tough. And I am probably a classic example of how not to lead effectively, but I will certainly share my experiences. I remember this one time, I'm in a car. My oldest is a daughter, and as one of my favorite comedians always says, boys will break your stuff, girls will screw your stuff up. It's a whole nother animal, raising a girl instead of raising a boy. I come home all the time and I see my boys doing something. I'm like, what are you doing? Or I come home and I see my daughter doing something and I say, oh, what am I doing? It's a different animal altogether. Anyway, I'm driving my daughter someplace with her gaggle of friends, and they apparently forgot that there was an adult in the car, and they were just having a conversation. And I was just driving. I was like the chauffeur, happily driving them along. And one of my daughter's friends were talking about how there was this boy that she really likes, but that she has to break it off because she's been hounding her, late at night. They're texting, and which is a problem probably right there. And what of course is he doing? Hey, send pics. Hey, send video. Hey, do this. And of course that made her feel uncomfortable, and she really liked the guy, but she just blocked him and is just going to start ignoring him at school because of it. And because I'm who I am and have an inability to be anybody else but who I am, had to butt into a conversation that I was not invited into. And so I just had to speak up, and I said, hey, listen, that's good. It's good to get out of that situation. Thank you so much for not going in that way, but I just want you to understand something. That young man is going to go and he's going to do that again to somebody else. He is going to go because he did not receive that correction, that guardrail like he should have. He's just going to do it again and again and again until one of two things happens. Either he gets corrected well enough to where he goes, oh, that's a jerk thing. I shouldn't do that. Okay, I'm sorry. I won't do that anymore. Or he screws up his entire life, right? He gets into some kind of drama and technically it's something that people can get charged with, right? So that's really what you got to think of. I'm glad that you got rid of this, but just next time you're in that situation, understand that what people need is they need to know that is unacceptable. And if you do that, I am not going to be your friend anymore. And then she gave me kind of a weird look and was like, okay. We moved on, and I drove to wherever they needed to. But I think that's really the crux of what I'm talking about. We can do that, where we can ignore it or we can, brush it off or whatever. But the world needs leaders. Our wards and our branches need to lead each other. So I think of Christ, right? I think of Christ in the situation where the adulteress was brought to him, right? And, this is right after the Mount of Olives where he proclaims his divinity, right? And he goes to the temple and he's teaching in the temple. And, of course, the Pharisees and Sadducees come with their trap, their cleverly laid trap where they want to trap him into saying something that's going to get him in trouble. And so they bring this woman to him that's been, and of course, looking back at my modern eyes, and I know we're not supposed to judge the past through our current lens, but what a horrific experience this is if you're a woman. I mean, goodness gracious, you could think of all the situations where this woman's just getting treated really poorly here. But I'm trying to, let's keep to the gospel, I guess. I feel for the woman, though, I really do. She's drug up in this group, in this public experience, ashamed and everything, and says, Rabbi, this one has been called in adultery. The law of Moses says that she needs to be stoned. It's right there in Deuteronomy. What do you think we should do? Do you think she should be stoned? Right? They're setting him up for the trap. And I think, people always attribute Christ in this situation. They talk about how he knows it's a trap and he sees it. But I don't think that's it. I don't think that's what's going on. I think as I read it and as I've reread it and as I think about what this is and how I view Christ, I think what it is he sees a bunch of people, not just the adulterers, but the Pharisees and Sadducees, and all the people gathered around him. He's looking at a bunch of fleas. He sees all these people and they're covered with fleas. Literally covered with fleas, sucking the joy and love of the gospel out of their life. So he does his Jesus thing where he kneels down and he writes something in the ground. And to go off on a tangent, I listened to this non-LDS preacher one time who just did this great thing about this experience. And he says, and I don't know if this is true, but it's a good thing, so I'll repeat it. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But he talks about, in Jewish eyes, by him writing in the ground, that was his way of saying, I wrote that law. I was there when Deuteronomy was written. I know what the law is, right? That's why he's writing. I have no idea what he wrote on the ground. Nobody does. But that's the idea. And I don't know if that's true, but man, that makes sense. I don't know if it's gospel, but it should be, I guess. I don't know. And then he does his Jesus thing where he says, you without sin cast the first stone. And of course that is a teaching that is just so straightforward, so easy, and is misused and out of context so many times as other people try to use it. It's just such a sad thing. But the idea is, hey, if you're perfect, then you be the judge, because I am perfect. And of course, they all have fleas on them. They know they have fleas, so they all go away. And then Christ, after doing this, looks to the woman and says, Woman, where are thy accusers? She says, well, they're gone. And he gives her some good news and says, I also do not accuse you. And that's all beautiful part of the story. That's all good parts of the story. Very good story. I like that story. But what he does next, I think, is the most important part of that, where he leads, right? He just got a bunch of fleas off this woman. He just cleared the deck of fleas off of her. Got rid of them all. And then looks to her and says, go and sin no more. Or, hey, just stay away from the fleas, right? Don't get yourself in this situation anymore. And it's that easy. Now, Christ could easily... and because I started doing it too, where he could have easily dwelled on her victimhood, say, hey, you're a victim. This is something that's been forced upon you. He could have easily done that, right? That would have been a very compassionate thing to do. He could have done that. He could have excused the sin. He could have buddied up to the Pharisees and Sadducees and tried to work it that way. He could have just ignored it. He could have ignored it and said, hey, I don't know, do what you want with her. He could have hounded them or her again and again. He could have done all these things. But Christ knew the 5 truths that President Nelson recently taught in that BYU devotional. He talks about the 5 truths where he talks about we are all sons and daughters of God. He loves us perfectly. Christ communicates that love through commandments or guardrails in our life to keep us safe and happy. And that we can know truth. We have that ability to know truth of things. But the most important of I don't know if the most important, but the most relevant right now is the second of the 5 truths that President Nelson taught, which is truth is truth. Now, I know this seems kind of a circular thing. It's kind of a Captain Obvious thing, right? But it's a bold statement saying, hey, if this is true, then it's true. What are we doing here? What are we talking about? Truth is truth, right? Christ knew this. And he knew I could clear the fleas off you, and I will. But what is better is if you don't get fleas on you in the first place. If you're good at just getting the fleas off of you. So he led at that moment where he could have done a bunch of other things. He led her in a good direction, which I think is an example to all of us. Now, I don't know. I really struggle with it. I have no idea how to be Christ-like. I don't. It's an overwhelming thought. But what I can do, and what I often do, is I see Christ-like qualities or attributes in somebody else in my ward, or somebody else that might not even be a member. I see an attribute, I see them doing something Christ-like, and I think to myself, oh, I can do that. I can do that thing that he's doing. I don't know how to do the Christ, but I can do that. That is doable for me. I want to be like him or them. So I'll tell you a story of a person that I want to be like. It was a home teaching companion of mine, a person who I think of as I look in my adult life, it's one of 3 really pivotal moments in my life where I'm very grateful that the right person was in the right place to say the right things and kind of change my direction. I'll tell you this story. So the Penny and Porter family had gotten into a habit when their kids were young of not getting to church on time. I know, it's a horrible sin. I get it. And in all honesty, we knew what time to get there. We were probably trying to get there a little bit late. You know, you don't have to be called on prayer. You know, you got kids. We were doing what we were doing, right? And so since we got there late, we didn't want to interrupt people, so we'd sit in a side classroom where we could hear the speakers in the hallway, right? And so, you know, we're listening to sacrament, we're doing good, and we got in this habit of doing that. And it was very comfortable because I didn't have to be reverent. I could screw around with my kids. I could have a fun time at church. It was very comfortable. And you know, I think in a lot of wards and churches that people could have patted me on the back and said, oh, you're fine, you're doing great. Your hair looks nice as you're standing in quicksand. They could have done that. Luckily, I had a branch president in this little branch who got up to the pulpit and said, brothers and sisters, from this point on, the deacons will not be giving sacrament to anybody who's in the hallway or the classroom. If you're not in the sacrament room when sacrament's being given, you ain't getting it. And he sat down. And I was lit. I was so appalled. I was like, what did he just say? First off, number one, I mean, there are other people who might have done it every once in a while, but we, the Penny and Porter family, were doing it all the time, right? So first off, this was a direct challenge to me, right? I knew exactly what that was, and I have pride. I'm a very prideful person. So that was definitely mixed in there. But then there was also this righteous indignation of the sacrament is a saving ordinance, and we should be trying to get it to people, not trying to restrict it to people, right? All of those very natural things that are very easy to start thinking. And I got into this stinking thinking mode where for the next couple of months, I was constantly and consistently thinking about this. I have a good 45, 50-minute drive to work every day and drive back home, and that drive was filled with me having an angry conversation about this. It was such an outrage. It was an abomination, you know, just you name it. I was so deep. I had so many fleas on me over this situation. I was covered in fleas, and it had sucked the life and joy out of the gospel out of it for me. And then that moment comes where I go home teaching, right? I'm still going through the motions, even though I'm not feeling the gospel maybe like I should, right? I'm still doing the things I'm supposed to be doing like a lot of people are doing, right? And we go home teaching back when we had home teaching. And me and my home teaching companion go to the house of this part member family. She's an active member. He is not a member. He's friendly, but really wants nothing to do with the church. They're kids, they'll go when mom goes, but they don't really care. And here we are as emissaries coming into the home, trying to, bring some light and life and the gospel and the love of the gospel into this home. And what happens? This becomes the conversation. This policy becomes the conversation. And I didn't start the conversation, but boy, did I jump in with both feet, man. I was, oh yeah, I agree with you 100%. This is this, and this is this, and this is this. And me and this lady, sweet sister, I love her, we're friends to this day, were thick as thieves, man. We were very comfortable in this conversation that we were having. And I didn't notice it at the time, but my home teaching companion, he was kind of not really joining in that much. He was just kind of, trying to, yeah, I know, just kind of trying to lighten it, trying to change subject probably. And then comes a conversation on the way home. We say goodbye. We had done enough of screwing up the spirit, I guess, in that home that night. We had to go do that in other places. And we're on the drive home, and me and my companion, of course, are still talking about it. And, he did a very leader-like thing to do where he listened, and instead of letting sympathy override, instead of ignoring it, instead of joining in, he listened to me. He expressed, I'm struggling with this too. I don't quite understand it, but I know him to be a good man, and I know that his intent is good, and I think that really matters. And I'm like, man, you're crazy. No, this is wrong, and this is wrong. Totally blew past what he was trying to teach, right? And then eventually he just looked at me and said, I hear you, I understand, but you do what you got to do. For me and my family, we're just going to be there on time. And that was it. What are you talking? Is it that easy? You're just gonna cave? I'm just gonna be there on time. It kind of hit me. I kind of thought about it. And it helped that in the process he said something to the effect of, you might want to be careful, you're getting kind of close to speaking evil of the Lord's anointed, which I probably was. I don't think I did speak evil of the Lord's anointed, but I was probably blurring the lines there a little bit. And he led. And he said, for me and mine, we're just going to be there on time. So I thought about that on the drive home. I don't think I was repenting yet, but I was kind of playing with the idea of repenting maybe, I guess. I go home and I talk to Penny. I say, Penny, man, I've been struggling with this for a couple of months. And she goes, yeah, I know you have. You haven't been able to talk about anything but that. I say, so I think what we need to do is just be there on time. Just start showing up. And of course, Penny kind of looks at me and says, yeah, well, thanks for finally showing up to the show here, getting on board, and agrees with me. And we make the decision then and there to just show up on time. And you know what happened? Good things. We were there on time. We were sitting reverently in church. We were having a more fulfilling and better sacrament experience. By following the counsel of our imperfect church leader, our experience was better because of it. But even more so than that, immediately upon me making this decision to change and leaving that behind, my countenance changed. My demeanor changed. My anger and frustration was gone. And me just exercising my agency in the direction of obedience, what was a huge stumbling block for me, and I would have certainly have ended up teaching that stumbling block to my children, was gone. And I went to church on time and was more reverent. I tried to explain to that man, that home teaching companion, how grateful I am for his leadership. And he, he's very nice and very humble, and I don't think he understands it, but he's very appreciative of it. But in all seriousness, listen, I have a firm testimony that if we want any protection for our children in this world, it comes through obedience to covenants that we have made in the temple. And that above all else, well, maybe not above all else, but that's one of the big ones. If we break that covenant and speak evil of the Lord's anointed, if we blur that line, we are putting our children in jeopardy. And that might make you angry to hear it. I could care less, right? Truth is truth. I want that covenant. I want the protection of that covenant for me and my children. I cannot afford to break that covenant. And I am so grateful for my friend who corrected me at that time. Oh, such a good dude. I'm so grateful for him. Listen, knock on wood, or knock on something that I'm pretending to be wood. At today's date, my children are doing pretty good. They've gone on missions. They're temple attending. They have joy in the gospel. That would have been in such jeopardy if I would have continued down that path, if I had not repented, if I had not gotten rid of my fleas. I am so grateful for that man who led me at that time, who did not just pat me on the back and say everything is fine, but said, you know what? You might want to think about what you're doing, and I'm going to do the right thing and begin to lead. I'm so grateful for him. There is that other side of the coin. That's a good example of good leadership. I think what's much more abundance, unfortunately, is examples of bad leadership. I'm thinking of a great woman who, this person's a fantastic individual. She was a young women's president, and she wanted to do all kinds of great things for the young women, and she was experiencing some frustration with her church leadership. Again, this is popping up again. This is kind of a constant theme. But she was struggling with her because she wanted to do this and that, and there she was being blocked and being told no and being, whatever. And she had a couple of counselors that she was commiserating with, and unfortunately in that situation there wasn't anybody leading. There was everybody patting themselves on the back and just kind of getting themselves in this negative loop, and it ended up with this great woman going and saying, I'm done, I want to be released. Boom. And she was. And that opportunity to serve was no longer. I wish at that time and place there was somebody who could have led. She was a great young women's president. I wish she could have led, and I wish that she would have continued being in that position for those young women. All it took was for somebody to lead. All it takes in our words is for somebody to lead. Now, if as I've been talking this evening, you're thinking of other people doing this, that, or the other thing, stop. Knock it off. You're missing the point. The point is what are you doing? When did you gossip or backbite? When were you frustrated by a leader? When were you breaking the small commandments? When were you complaining about another member? Or when were you reinforcing a friend who were doing any of those things? When did you do this? Let me ask you, were you leading? You were leading. Were you leading in a good direction or a bad direction? I'll tell you the same thing I taught those primary kids. Because of who you are, because of the blessings in your life, people will be drawn and people will follow you. There is not a situation where you're not leading. You will be leading. Are you leading in a good direction or a bad? I just want to express my gratitude once again for those individuals, those guardrail individuals in my life who kept me from the ravine. I am so grateful for them. Sometimes they did not correct nicely. It was not fun. But boy, did I need it. Boy, did I need it. Part of who I am today is because of those guardrail people. I am so thankful for it. I say these things in the name of Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.